All right, here we are, the Do Big Things podcast once again. And I'm talking to my man, Josh Lasky, author of the book, Every Step is a Gift. I can't wait to talk to him, man. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing really well. It is such a pleasure to be on the podcast. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, man, I'm pumped. Um, so I read your book. I really enjoyed it. And you probably don't know this. I'm kind of an armchair writer myself. And I have written a few books back in the day. And so I have 3 books that are self-published, 1 book that was published. And, this is a few years back. So I'm pretty pumped, man. Was this a self-published book? Was this a published book?
Yeah, good question. So I use kind of a hybrid approach. So
Okay.
I did work with a publisher,
Okay.
but it's sort of this model where they provide the guidance and the structure. They provide a series of editors between your developmental editor, an acquiring editor, a marketing and revisions editor,
Okay.
and then you go through copywriting and proofreading, and you have a layout designer and a cover designer. So you get all the supports, but you are expected to do self-promotion. And so I crowdsourced, crowdfunded, for the costs to actually hire all those supports, editors and marketing, professionals and design creative folks to support the production of the book. And then got all kinds of support to actually, get my files ready and then upload them to Amazon and to wholesalers. So I learned a lot about how little I know about the publishing process as I wrote the book, and I definitely couldn't have done it without the publisher. It's called New Degree Press, so a little bit of a hybrid approach, but it was really, really fun, really rewarding, and I'm glad to now have, like you, this artifact at the end of a long road of effort. So
Totally.
it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I really enjoyed the book, and it's really well written, man. And as I was reading it, I'm like, I wonder if he had an editor or how did this all go? Was there a big process there as far as the editing of the book, or did you take care of most of that?
Yeah, what's interesting is, I started writing the book essentially in journal entries.
Mm.
Over the course of the experience that I talk about as a caregiver for my dad, who had Parkinson's for the last 23 years of his life, and I was in that support role for a little over a decade. But I would write these journal entries that were quite frankly crap. After getting home from his nursing home,
Mm-hmm.
or a long night in the emergency room, or just visiting him and dropping off groceries, and kind of wallowing in bitterness. And it wasn't until I started revisiting them a few years later, and I was like, maybe there's a bigger story to tell. Maybe there's a way to weave these kind of crummy journal entries together into a broader narrative, with a little bit of a storyline to it, a little bit of an arc. And so I had the idea of maybe writing a book at some point, but I think it wasn't until he passed away in 2018 where I felt like, I had gotten a little bit of closure kind of in my experience as a caregiver, and I was able to sort of take a step back, reflect on it, and then weave all these pieces together into something that resembled a book. And so most of that was there, frankly, I don't think there was a ton of editing that happened. There was polishing, sure. There was a lot of feedback to get the writing to a place where it was a little bit more of like showing than telling, right? More descriptive elements rather than like a lot of like stream of consciousness.
Mm.
So, emphasizing dialogue, interactions with my dad, emphasizing descriptions of people and places and things I saw rather than like, here's how I felt. But we got there, I think, pretty quickly. And, I sort of started the writing process, proper, probably back in January or February, and then published in December. So it was kind of like a
Oh,
high velocity process, but keeping in mind that a lot of this was like basically pieced together from these older drafts of like
totally.
little vignettes and experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is your first book, correct?
It is, yeah, and I don't know if there are more. So if that's the
Really?
next question.
Okay.
I don't know. This writing this story was a little bit of like a fulfillment of a promise to myself, and I think that it was one of those goals that you sort of set for yourself. Much like a an ultra distance race that you haven't, eclipsed yet, and you work steadily toward it. But now that I've gotten there, I'm taking a little bit of time to breathe and tell the story of the book and help it get out into the universe. And then, who knows? It might take a little bit longer than usually what it takes after I finish a race before I sign up for another one, because I know that everyone has that bug. But I might get back to that point where I want to write again. We'll see.
Yeah. Any ideas rumbling around in your head?
I definitely have ideas. I think
you don't have to tell us. I'm just curious.
Yeah. I think there are some ideas. I think that I wanna let myself have enough time to reflect on the process of writing this book, and really absorbing all the lessons I can before I figure out what's next. Because even before I start the planning for the next book, I want to make sure I really internalize everything I can learn from not just the writing of every step as a gift, but also like the marketing, the promotion, the sort of storytelling around the book, and also continuing to collect really valuable feedback from people like you who've been kind enough to read the thing. So we'll get there, and I don't know, I'll report back to you at some point when I've got a more concrete idea.
For sure. Yeah. When was the book released?
So formally published early December, first week of December.
Oh.
So we're about 6-8 weeks now.
Okay.
Into the thing. Yeah. So it's pretty new, and I've had the pleasure of doing a few podcast interviews and doing a few book talk events, and I had kind of a launch for what I call my beta reader community, which are the folks that opted into the pre-sale and helped fund the actual publication of the book, which is exciting. But, still early in the journey, to be honest.
Totally. That's exciting. And it took you less than a year to write?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was a sort of a compact, process. But I think I had the benefit of one of writing a memoir, which I think that other folks that are writing on nonfiction or writing fiction or fantasy, there's a lot more complexity. There may be interviews you have to do. There's a lot of background research you might have to do. Luckily, I didn't have a lot of that, so it was more just kind of how do I formalize the story that I'm already really familiar with and shape it into something that's, I think, readable and somewhat compelling for people that don't know who I am and don't know my story at all. So
Sure.
that was the goal.
And I imagine it helped if you were pulling from old journal entries as well. I mean, that's kind of how my first book started out as well. I'd always been a journaler. I was always writing to kind of get the steam out of the teapot. It was like a form of therapy for me. And I just enjoyed the process. And then when I decided I actually wanted to put something together, I had all this old material. I could go through it and pull, not all of it, but pieces here and there. So I guess that might speed it up a little bit, but it's impressive, man. I dig it.
Yeah. No, thank you. And it sounds like we had a similar experience. And I'm eager, so you said you've written a few books. I mean, was there an arc after that first one that you wrote? I mean, did you pick up some steam? Did you learn some tricks? Did it get easier? Can you inspire me that way?
I don't know if I have any inspiration to give there. It got a little bit easier for sure. I mean, I'm just a huge fan of literature in general. And so I guess I consider myself more, like I said, a fan of literature than a writer. But I just thought that I had a couple stories I could put down on paper. And I was just at a time in my life where I just wanted to get this stuff out. And man, it was just, and I don't do as much writing these days. And I'm not saying there's not any more books in me, but it was just a certain time in my life when I needed that sort of outlet, it was before I ran. So that was kind of my outlet, and eventually running became the outlet. And so, it just kind of, it did get easier, but and I'm also wondering, in your case, when you're writing a book, was it all encompassing? I mean, was it taking up pretty much every inch of your brain at all time? And also, were you working a full-time job while you were writing?
Yeah, I mean, you raised a bunch of good questions, and I mean, yes, I think the writing process certainly occupied all of the free space in my brain
Totally.
that I could allow it.
Mhm.
But yes, I have a full-time job that I'm probably not quitting to become a full-time author anytime soon. But it would be, it's fun to dream.
Sure.
But no, I was working a full-time job for, the vast majority of the time I was writing this book over the past year. And yeah, it was something that I did kind of in nights and weekends.
Mm.
I mean, the reality is, like, I think because of the pandemic, people are discovering that that they have maybe some more free time that they give up to Netflix or television or other maybe less productive habits. And people are starting to realize, like, by sort of channeling some of that time into creative outlets, it's kind of fulfilling in a different way. It's engaging in a different way. I think getting a product out of that time is invigorating. It's
Totally.
energizing. So
Yeah. 100%.
yeah, and the point that you made about writing as an outlet, I can't emphasize more. I mean, the early days of taking care of my dad when he was sick, and I moved him to Washington D.C. where I was living. Writing was the form of therapy that I had available to me.
Mhm.
Because I became his caregiver at 22, none of my friends had ever been through this before. None of them had parents who were, sick or dealing with disabilities or frankly dying.
You
And
were
so
young. You were a
I,
young
I
man
was
when this
young.
was all happening.
It's totally young. And so, as much as I think some of them tried and they did a good job of supporting me in the way of kind of like distracting me from that reality, none of them had, that kind of ability to empathize and connect through their own experience. So I turned to writing. And it was cheaper than going to a shrink once a week or once every other week, right?
Yeah.
So and I hadn't yet discovered running at that time, early in my journey as a caregiver. And so it was an outlet, it was an escape, and ultimately it became the starting point for writing the book and telling the story in a more formal way.
Cool.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so the book goes, I mean, you took care of your dad for a number of years, and I feel like that was maybe about 2/3 of the book. That was what the majority of the book was about. And eventually you found endurance sports and ultra running. And I want to get to all that because I'm an ultra runner too. So I dig it all, man. But I want to get a little bit more, I want to dig a little bit deeper with the writing stuff. I'm just curious, like, what was your process? I mean, are you handwriting stuff first and then taking it to a computer, or was there a number of drafts as you were writing, or what was that like?
Yeah, definitely a number of drafts. I'm not big into handwriting. I
Okay.
wish I was, because I don't know. There's something romantic about starting a book with actual pen to actual paper. But I ended up writing sort of individual chapters at a time. And before I got to chapters, though, I started with scenes, right? So if you think of a scene as maybe 500 or 1,500 words, it could be an interaction. It could be a place you visited or a thing you experienced, to sort of this compact little building block. And then how do you sort of add to it with like I said, dialogue or descriptive elements? And then how do you connect scenes that are sort of part of, this similar lesson or takeaway, and then, place them into, the same bucket, that we call a chapter.
Mhm.
And so, for me, I think, the chapters, in some ways they stand alone as individual essays, but
Sure.
they are really meant to be kind of pieces of a bigger puzzle, a bigger mosaic, that I think take the reader on a journey with me. And I think, um, you know what's interesting is that there are some chapters that I think I didn't modify a whole lot from the original journal entry that I wrote, like,
Mhm.
you know, maybe 8 or 10 years ago at this point.
Mm.
But then there are others that I had to reach back into, not just the journal entries, but other like artifacts that I had. Like I have like a whole stack of, papers and documents and sort of like little scraps from, places my dad lived in assisted living or in his nursing home that I just have found interesting or memorable. You know, and there's a whole chapter where I talk about kind of going into his assisted living, you know, apartment, his little studio efficiency apartment. And it was at the time when I was transitioning him to nursing, and I had to like basically get all the stuff ready to move out of there because he was heading to a different facility. And, you know, that was where I sort of like went through his stuff in this like super invasive way, and discovered stuff about him that I frankly didn't know and probably didn't want to know. But, you know, like other children who are in that role for parents, or if you're, you know, unfortunately saying farewell to a parent and they pass away and you've got to go through their stuff, you know, you get really, really up close and personal with some of those intimate details. And so, you know, those like gritty, kind of like dirty details, you know, sometimes took a physical form, like stuff he had laying around. You know, he like, I found like, you know, a cocktail napkin with a woman's name and a phone number, you know, and that just became a thing that I just held on to, right? Because it was just like a weird, strange detail. He had like, you know, ripped magazine, you know, advertisements out for, you know, like you know, discount vacations, right, that he might take one day. And so why was that in his stuff, right? But like I thought maybe, you know, later just to sort of reflect on that and add that in as a really kind of you know, specific detail to the story, as something that would sort of make it a little bit richer for the reader. So, you know, but the last thing I'd say about sort of my process is that it is by no means perfect, and as you know, first-time writer, you're just sort of kind of figuring it out as you go, and there's a whole lot for me to learn about that process if I'm going to do this again. So.
Did you enjoy the process though? Did you have fun with it? I mean, I know that it's like, yeah, it's hard to put it into words when you're writing a book. Like you are just in that world, man. That is just almost all you're thinking about. And if you're listening to something on TV or the radio, you're picking parts of people's conversations and words and you're jotting them down, and it's all kind of going into the book. But yeah, I guess my question was, did you enjoy it?
Yeah, and you know, in a way, I always try to find a way to relate, you know, everything back to running or ultra distance or endurance sports. I enjoyed it, but in a way, it was, and I hate the term, but it was kind of like a type 2 fun, right? I mean, I think you get into writing sometimes, you're gonna love, you know, sitting down at your computer this one session and banging out a story, and then another day or night you're gonna, you know, kind of mosey up to the keyboard and you're gonna be like, this fucking sucks. I don't want to write this, either because I don't have the words or because I have to relive something that was pretty horrific in my past to transmit the story to the page. But again, I think that there's something in my wiring and perhaps our wiring as runner authors, right, that allows you to sort of persist through those moments of you know, struggle and frustration and maybe some self-doubt. You carry yourself a little bit and you prop yourself up and you you know, you push through. And so I think that there were times when it was fun, and then there were times when I was like, I'm doing this so that my future self can thank me.
Yeah.
You know, and I just, I'm putting up with it because it has to be done. And I mentioned before, I'm fulfilling a promise to myself in writing this book. I'm hopefully trying to share something of merit with the world. I think there are a lot of other caregivers out there that feel incredibly lonely, and feel really disconnected and hopeless. And I was hoping that in writing the story and going through the sometimes painful process of actually putting my experience to words, that I was giving something of use to people that are, you know, either have been in a similar situation and haven't found the courage or the words to tell their own story, or the people that are living it right now and just, you know, they're deep and they're dark into it, and it seems like it's never going to end, and every day is just a new kind of form of hell, watching a loved one suffer. So it was important for me to get through for myself, and then also for others that I think are struggling in different ways.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are going to be able to identify with that part of the story, because I think it was on your website that it mentioned like 78% of people end up being a caregiver at some point in their life, you know, and most people probably aren't setting out to necessarily be on that path, but a lot of people end up there. So, yeah, and I highly recommend this book to anybody that's going through that. Just, you know, as a comfort, maybe. I don't know. I mean, like whenever I'm in something, I like to find out who else is in that world, I guess. And yeah, man, I really recommend it, and totally dug it. I want to ask you, who are some of your literary influences?
Yeah.
You
Great,
mentioned
great.
Cormac McCarthy in the book,
I do.
and
Yeah.
I think
I
maybe
list a little
Thoreau as
section.
well.
What's that? Sorry.
And I think maybe Thoreau as well.
Yeah. I did. Good memory.
Oh yeah, no, no, that,
You clearly like, you took your notes as you read. Yeah. I mean, so I lifted a section of the road, and put it in the book, obviously credited,
yeah,
one of my sort of literary, idols, Cormac McCarthy. I mean, The Road is a really important book for me for a lot of reasons. And I kind of write about this a little bit, but that was a father-son story. And, um, I sort of, at least back then, I really idealized the post-apocalyptic genre because, to me, it's fantasy, it's not horror. There's a beauty in the simplicity of that lifestyle when all detail is sort of, pushed aside and it's like only the essential. It's like, you know, look out for the people you love, find food, avoid the cannibals and zombies and, thieving bands, right? And just make it. And I don't know, there was something that spoke to me really powerfully there. But yes, Thoreau, I think, has been influenced different ways. I've been shaped by Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius. I've read his stuff, and then I'm as much a fan of Krakauer's writing as I think so many listeners and others in the community are. I think Into Thin Air is just like I've probably read it 3 or 4 times at this point. I come back to it a lot. I love adventure stories. I love stories of perseverance, of grit, of overcoming, and struggling through adversity. I think those are just powerful, powerful narratives.
yeah,
Yeah, and the one that I think, like many people, kind of got me, really jazzed up and inspired to like start running was Born to Run.
yeah.
And I'm grateful that Chris McDougall wrote the book, and put it out into the world for people to like, get excited about. And I gave the book credit for, basically opening the floodgates for a lot of people to enter the ultra running community and discover something that they're really passionate and excited about. Yeah, lots. I mean, I try to read a lot. I think as I was writing, I wasn't able to read a lot because I had to give up some of the reading time to do the writing. But
That was actually going to be my next question: is if
yeah,
you were
yeah.
reading anything while you were writing it.
If I was, it was just revisiting old books that I've already read, and it was just like little bits at a time. I think at one point I read Ready Player One, which, again, like just kind of fantasy stuff. I enjoy sci-fi stuff, and so I picked that up for a week and read it, and then kind of got back to writing. And I actually just picked up Ernest Cline's sequel, Ready Player Two, so I'm gonna read that now.
Nice.
Yeah, I think part of my process is maybe trying to lay off reading for a little bit so that I wasn't too overly influenced by any single author as I tried to find my own voice.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to do it, man. Did you add any fiction in there at all, or would you consider this 100% memoir?
Oh, it's definitely 100% memoir. I think if there was literary license I took, I think that there were maybe some pieces of dialogue that I had to recreate from memory as best I could.
Sure.
But, most of what I did the dialogue on, honestly, was notes that I took after I actually saw my dad. So, like, there are lines that I mentioned that he said when he was in a demented state while he was, like, at GW Hospital here in DC. And those are lines that I wrote down after being with him in my notebook. I kept a series of little black books to take notes at doctor's appointments or after calls with his social worker, or visiting him and talking to the charge nurse, etc. So I maybe that was part of sort of my a defense mechanism of sorts, like being a journalist to my own experience, right, and trying to be as objective as I could in the moment, so I wasn't just overcome with the emotional weight of it all. So I took all these little notes. So yeah, I mean, there wasn't a ton of license. I think there were a few times where I had flashbacks where I might not have had that flashback in that moment, but I think that I've every flashback that I talked about was something that I did feel at some point during my experience looking after my dad. So it was just a matter of sort of how do I plug this in the right place, so it makes sense, sort of given what else is happening in the story in that moment. But I appreciate that question. It's interesting. I had someone ask me, did you just come up with the concept, and did a publisher, did an editor write this for you? I was like, no, like this is, I mean, I get it. So at some points it seems like it's ridiculous, because the experience was ridiculous. But no, I told it, pretty much exactly like it was, and didn't take too much liberty. So.
Did you think this was going to be did you set out to write a memoir from the beginning, or, I mean, like, do you know the author James Fry, who wrote
I do. I know of James Fry. I haven't read any of his books.
Okay. Well, I highly recommend it. He's a great writer. But I don't know if you remember, there was the Oprah controversy. Oprah brought him on as one of the book club of the month writers, and he wrote this tremendous book about his recovery of drugs and alcohol through a rehabilitation center. And then come to find out that there was, and he published it as a memoir. And then when the book was released, come to find out there was quite a bit of fiction in there. Like, it wasn't really 100% fact. There was a lot of things in there that didn't happen, but this had been published as a memoir. Well, come to find out, he had shopped the book around as a work of fiction, and it was a beautiful work of fiction. Like, it was written it's fantastic. It's a really powerful book. But all these, Oprah fanatics were just so offended that it wasn't 100% true, because they all believed the book so much, like they felt it, and there was this big uproar, and I think he had to flee the country for a while because he went to Europe, where in Europe, that sort of thing happens all the time. When people sit down to write a book, they fictionalize they make themselves the superhero, essentially, like, if you're going to write a book in the first person, like, I'm going to be the hero of my story, and I'm going to make it the way I want,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, right. So I just looked it up because I couldn't remember the title of the book, but it's called A Million Little Pieces. I remember this, it's a while back. But yeah. No, I mean, maybe there was like an urge to, to at one point, to like, how do I dramatize this a little bit more to make it a little more juicy? But I don't think I even needed to. I mean,
sure.
It was hard enough for me to get through, and I knew that just kind of telling it like it is would be powerful. Mm-hmm. And I also think that it's interesting. I never really pictured myself as the hero of the story. I guess when you're writing a story, you're going to tell it in a biased way, mm-hmm. And you're going to put yourself at the center of that universe. This isn't a biography about my dad. It's more a biography of me, but really it's a memoir telling our story through my eyes. Mm-hmm. But I tried to present some situations in as objective a way as I could. I think that for example, there are times early on in the journey where I reflected on the fact that I thought I could take care of my dad and kind of like fix him and fix our relationship, and like that totally didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Our relationship was rocky before I came into the role of caregiver, and I thought maybe like by having him closer to me, like maybe I could repair that relationship. Maybe I could remind him of what a traditional father son relationship could look like, and remind him of his fatherly responsibilities. But like, he continued to be selfish, and I continued to struggle to like to be a good caregiver. And I hope some of that comes out in the book. I mean, there were definitely moments where I definitely didn't have the balance right, where I like either overdid it, focusing on him, or underdid it, frankly, and kind of, you know, wasn't there for him in as supportive way as I could. I mean, I tell this story about, this is sort of like a very, zoomed in version of that, but like I pushed him, in his rollator when we were trying to walk and find a movie theater, and almost like bumped him out of the rollator. No clue what I was doing. So I don't know. I'm hoping that there are moments where people realize how helpless I felt,
Yeah.
and how much I was figuring it out as I went along, and kind of had no idea what I was doing. And in the end, I think that like as a caregiver, you kind of have to make your peace. And as a storytelling author, I kind of had to make my peace, with the effort that I put in, and what I could do for my dad, which, I think simultaneously you feel like it's never enough. And then you also feel like you got robbed a whole bunch of time and emotional energy. So, yeah, I don't think you ever are in a place where you can do justice either to yourself or the person you're trying to help. So, yeah.
That's powerful. Yeah, and all those things do come across in the book as well. Like, I felt in the beginning of the book, especially, you were going over the top to try and take this duty on. This is something you really felt passionate about. And like you said, you were trying to repair sort of a rocky relationship with your father. And then, but I also got the feeling that when it was time for you to go home at night and you got on the bus and you just kind of went, and you were like, you're finally back into your own world. You're finally away from that. And there was some relief there, and you could take a deep breath, and you could tell it was stressful because, you're 21 to, early 20s, mid 20s. And you could tell that you were struggling. It was rough, but
yeah, I mean, it was, I'm glad that came across, because, those exhalations of relief were some of the most cathartic moments, right? Like I could feel, and it's interesting. Like I would go into these visits with my dad with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear, frankly, and I would spend a time with him, and sometimes it would be like super painful or super frustrating. I'd be telling him to use his walker, and he would, tell me to shut up, or I would, be like helping to like clean up after him, and he would just kind of make a mess immediately, or it was clear he ignored something I asked him to do last time, or he hadn't been taking care of himself properly, or whatever. And so, there's a lot of there's a lot of anxiety that came with those moments. I mean, and that's why, I think it's one of the things I tried to transmit in the book is like, it's hard to show up for people when they're in bad shape. But that's when they need you the most. And a lot of people shy away from those responsibilities. I mean, if people had a choice not to be a caregiver, most people, I think, choose not to be a caregiver. They don't want to enter the horror, and come face to face with some of those realities, presented by that person that they love. But I'm glad you picked up on that, because it's super central. Riding my bike home from the nursing home, which when he was living out in Rockville and I was living in DC, that was like a 12 or 13 mile bike ride home, which is just like a perfect amount of time to sort of like transition through that portal back to like my personal reality from his, or getting on a bus or a subway and just like sinking into the seat, right? Like having that moment where you knew you did something that you needed to do and you showed up, but ultimately like, it was draining, and there's a recovery from that.
100%. Yeah. If your dad were to read this book now, what do you think he would think about it?
That's a great question.
It might be a hard question. I mean, it was hell when my parents read my stuff. They like when they found out what was going on inside my head, like, oof, that was rough, man. So I'm just curious.
I think that I would want him to feel proud of me. I knew that, you know, he expressed a lot of times when he was around, he was proud of me, which meant a lot. Um, but I would, you know, I would want him to feel like I did some justice to the story.
Mhm.
You know, I didn't paint him to be, um, you know, a model dad.
Mhm.
He wasn't.
Sure.
I didn't. You know, I didn't. I also didn't like unnecessarily tell every disparaging, you know, detail I could have, right? So like, um, but I think that I tried to reflect the character that he was. And I think that every child's, you know, starts out in a position where you hold your parents up on a pedestal, right? And you know, you assume that because they brought you into the world that they have answers, and they know what they're doing. And then you get a little bit older and you're like, actually, like as an adult, I understand that, like, you know, like clearly you do not have all the answers. You've never had all the answers,
Mhm.
and like you're not infallible.
Yeah.
And so your parents go from this sort of like hero status when you're a kid to, you know, something more human. And you realize that, you know, your parents are like everyone, they're flawed, and frankly, you know, some parents are really flawed. Some parents are really messed up. Some are super narcissistic or
Mhm.
self-centered or self-absorbed, you know, and sometimes out of necessity. My dad had a horrible hand dealt to him with Parkinson's disease. Um, you know, and it's particularly cruel for him, I think, because he was a runner and a triathlete for most of his adult life until his diagnosis. So he was forced, I think, into a position where he like wanted to get his last licks before getting, you know, too sick to take care of himself. And I think that's where our relationship kind of got strained. I was, you know, in my teenage years. But you know, I think that ultimately we have to get to a place where we forgive our parents, and I hope that that came through in the
Totally.
pages.
Yeah.
And you know, hopefully he would get that message if you read it.
Mhm.
He might be a little embarrassed. I mean, I think I've told probably some details that are really intimate.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want him to feel shame though. He's not the type of person that feels shame. He was a totally shameless character,
Mhm.
for sure. So I think overall on the net, I think he would appreciate the character that I made him into. Though I'm sure he'd have some beef with pieces of it, which, you know, it's okay. He would be entitled to that.
Well, the author Charles Bukowski said, if your parents like what you're doing the wrong thing. So,
Right?
so there's got to be a tiny bit of beef there, but what comes across is your love for him. So, yeah, it was really well done. Would you mind too terribly much if I read a paragraph?
Please.
Okay. I think that I would probably hate to hear someone else's voice read my stuff, but
Go for it.
and this is just a paragraph just talking about what sort of a state that he was in. Perhaps the biggest issue was the deterioration of my father's cognitive state. My visits had gone from exchanging rants about Donald Trump and the New York Knicks to testing whether my father knew he was speaking to his oldest son. He was having trouble separating fact from fiction, and the timing of major events of his life were jumbled in his mind. He expressed worry that my mother was sleeping with an old friend of his. On more than one occasion, he asked me how my boyfriend was doing. I had never had a boyfriend, and my father by then had met Kate. For a period, he believed he was still in the sign business. He told me he just cut a deal with the Hebrew Home to replace the sign outside the building for $4,000. He would routinely ask if I had given them the drawings of the proposed new signs. So, I mean, that's painful, man. Like, just going to visit your father when he's in that state, just like day after day, week after week, and you're just absorbing it. Like, that's rough.
Yeah. Yeah, you got right into you know, you drilled right into the you know, the heart of, I think, what it's like to, you know, bear witness, which is the title of that chapter, bearing witness, you know, to someone who's going through a really, really tough time. And, you know, to realize in the role of son or spouse or, you know, whoever it is, as a caregiver, there's so little you can do. And so, that was part of the progression of my dad's Parkinson's. Eventually, it transitioned into dementia. And so, those visits toward the end, I mean, as much as they were anxiety inducing and, emotionally draining early on, toward the end, knowing that I was only going to get a few minutes of sort of like lucid brain activity from him where he'd recognize me and where I can engage in conversation, made it just so much tougher.
Yeah.
But, I think, again, as I said before, showing up in those moments where showing up is just excruciating, it's just so important. And it's important for the person that you're showing up for, and it's important for you as someone who's taking the time and, making that sacrifice, making that space in your heart and in your soul to, like, to be the witness to that.
Yeah. Well, on a lighter note, the cool thing about all of this was that you eventually found endurance sports. And this is how I know you're a smarter guy than me, because if I was in my, 20s, even 30s, I would have turned straight to the bottle dealing with something like this, and you took a healthier outlet. You eventually rode your bike across the country, and then that led you to running. Tell me about that progression and how it all went down.
Yeah. So, I trace the start of my passion for endurance sports back to like one specific moment. Basically, I had kind of on a whim signed up for a Spartan race, and thought I was cool. Went out super hard on like very little training, but like I had been doing parkour for a couple years at a parkour gym in DC. So I thought, combining like the sort of like base aerobic, conditioning I have, or, just my, my genetics plus my parkour skills, I'm competitive, baby. Like, let's go. So I start running this race, and, lo and behold, like probably like a half mile in, I get to an obstacle, which is basically like a raised platform that that gave way to what looked like a pool of water a few feet below it. So I'm like, full speed up this ramp to this platform and jump off the platform. And as soon as I hit the surface of the water, I also hit the floor below it. So it was literally only like 2 or 3 inches of water.
Oh no.
Just like absolute bullshit. It was on this like horse trials course. So that was like a thing for horses to like jump into, and it's just like a little like, sheen of water. Anyway, so I cracked my ankle pretty bad, and I was like, oh, maybe I just sprained it, I'll keep going. And it was completely broken. And so I ambulance to the hospital, surgery the next day, had a plate and 7 screws installed, and then the recovery was cast, one more surgery, several months of PT where I'm picking up marbles with my toes and putting them into a bucket, that kind of shit. And during that recovery, when I was laid out, I felt like my dad. I mean, I felt like immobile and fully dependent, and I was wallowing so hard, and felt so bad for myself. And somehow during that, that dark period, where I broke up with my long-term girlfriend, I studied for the LSAT and took the LSAT because I thought maybe I wanted to be a lawyer. I started my own business. Like, I did all these things, and then I suddenly just stumbled upon the solution, which is like, actually, I just want to do what makes me happy, and that's riding my bike. So as soon as I got better, I got on my bike and started at the steps of the U.S. Capitol building and headed west, and zigzag my way across the country and en route to Seaside, Oregon. And so that was the start. I mean, that trip got me kind of hooked on everything that followed, in my running. But that trip, I think, breaking my ankle and then deciding to take the trip and then being on the trip and the empowerment that comes along with solo self-supported long distance bike touring. I mean, that changed the trajectory of my life. And it also changed the trajectory of my role as a caregiver, for sure. I was reinvigorated after that.
Mm.
I had a new sense of gratitude. Instead of being kind of bitter about like having to take care of my dad, it was more about how do I make sure I show respect for my abilities, my mobility, especially against the backdrop of watching him decline, and be relegated to a nursing home in a wheelchair, and needing to be fed. So yeah, it was a huge attitude adjustment that occurred, and that was sort of the seed, the starting point for I think all the endurance stuff to follow.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Um, I feel like, someone who rides their bike across the country could probably just write a book on that. And I
There are
think,
a lot of them,
yeah,
actually.
I
I,
think you
I,
kept it at like one chapter, didn't you?
I had to. So what's interesting is that there are tons of books out there. Many are self-published. Not to say they don't have merit, but
Yeah.
there are tons of narratives out there about people riding their bike very, very far distances, much further than me, and over much harder terrain. You've got people, publishing books on riding the divide. You got people publishing on riding from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. So like, or covering multiple continents. So like, you know,
Huh.
I wanted a little bit of differentiation. I also, look, I could write many books on that, but I think the reality is that I wanted to keep it this sort of like compact little nugget, story within a story,
Mhm.
to offer a little bit of relief for the caregiving narrative, but also kind of show that transition into the running stuff that came a little bit later on in the book as well.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what that chapter was. It was sort of like a pivot point. Like you're discovering this new thing about yourself, and then you blossom even further when you got into running. So it was a cool transition. Yeah. So you rode your bike across the country, and then that just, like I said, led to running. And now at this point, you've done all kinds of races, ultra marathons, rim to rim to rim, which is one of my favorite runs. I've done that a couple times. Yeah, man, so now you're deep into this thing. Is there any slowing down with the running, or is that just progressing more and more?
Yeah, I think running, like writing used to be in the beginning before I discovered running. Running has become an outlet for me. It's become meditation.
Yep.
It's become escape. It's become the pause button on what is otherwise a very busy life. And it's also provided, a source of physical conditioning. I'm never the type of person that's gonna like get into going to the gym and lifting. Like I just don't have that discipline, or going to a class. So running is like this convenient, way to escape, and sort of give my mind a space and give my body a workout, which is cool. And I think, after I got back from the trip, you know, again, like, sort of on a whim, just like I signed up for that Spartan race, I signed up for the Baltimore Marathon, and just to see if I could sort of keep it going, so to speak, right? I remember getting back from the bike ride and feeling like, oh man, I'm gonna have to go back to like, inhabiting, a little, fabric and plastic cubicle for 9 or 10 hours a day, looking at a screen. That's gonna suck.
Yeah.
So what do I do to like kind of spice it up? I sort of like resisted this return to ordinary, right? So, um, sign up for the Baltimore Marathon, and like I remember running that marathon. My longest training run for that marathon was 14 miles, and I was like, you know, I'm good after that. Like, it's like, and lo and behold, like people get hurt that way, right? But I managed to get through it, and just feeling like, actually, I could do more. And so that feeling, I think, was the feeling that I wanted. Like if I had emptied the tank on that race, and like, felt like dirt afterwards, I may never have gone into ultras. Like, so I sort of like, I'm grateful to myself then that I didn't like, do 100%. It was just like, I'm going to get through, I'm going to finish, and, I opened myself up to this world of possibilities. So it's really cool. And yeah, from there, it was just like, okay, what does 50K feel like? What does 50 miles feel like? And then worked my way up to 100 milers. I've only done 100 miler. I know you've done a whole handful. I don't know if I'm going to return to that distance, but man, that was, there is a chapter in the book where I do write about my experience of the Rocky Raccoon, which it's sort of like, this is an oxymoron, but it's a beginner 100-miler, right?
Mhm,
Like for
mhm.
people that run ultras, like, yes, they understand that. But for people that don't, they're like, fuck you, a beginner 100-miler.
Right,
Thank you.
right. Well,
Yeah.
let me read this one more sentence and then I'll be done reading.
Oh, sweet.
But yeah, at the end of your Rocky Raccoon, this kind of sums it up. My mind felt like it had spent a full day shaken up in a washing machine while my body had been tumbling in the dryer.
I'm glad you like that. I'm glad that resonated with you. I was, I debated that line for a while.
Really?
It's a little hokey, but I think that for people that have been at the end of a 100-mile run,
Hmm.
they get it, right? I
Totally.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So
It's like, yeah, your body feels that way. And then you've lived like 10 lifetimes in your mind as well. Like it's crazy the things you think about in the over the course of 100 miles. Like you're thinking about your childhood and, or at least me anyways, like conversations I had when I was a kid and, babysitters and people at work and just your mind goes all over the place. You just have so much time to think and you just get deep into your head and hell, I listen to music half the time too, but yeah, it's crazy where your mind goes. So
oh my gosh, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, it was, that run was a bigger workout mentally than it was physically. I mean, I think at some point your body goes into it shuts down obviously, but it goes into sort of this autopilot, and then your mind has to will yourself forward, right? And so like your mind, it's not just, you're not just moving the body parts anymore.
mhm.
You're sort of every split second is addressing the reality of the pain, plus this extra effort to will your body forward, plus like handling the demons that set in when you realize how much further you have to go, and the fact that you're running at night,
Mhm.
and the fact that you're stressed out because you feel like you haven't had enough calories or enough salt or hydrating properly, whatever. So it's wild. I think there was something I tried to convey, and it may have only resonated with the club of people that have run 100-milers, but like late into that race I had a low, and like the only way I was going to get through a period is if I literally just ran behind other people that were near me. Like I couldn't have run alone. Like
Mhm.
it wasn't happening. Like I didn't have the mental energy to
Yeah.
actually cover the ground unless I was just like doing the work of keeping up with the people in front of me. I couldn't even look at the trail anymore. I couldn't even look for blazes or flags or anything. It was just like, I will follow the human beings in front of me. I will shut everything out in this world, and that's the only thing that will get me through. And that's resting my mind, my most important muscle right now. So
Yeah.
I think you probably get that. Other people who've run it, but I think some of the people reading the book are like, this is wild.
No, I totally get it. And it's funny, man, I can resonate with so much of your story. So, my quote unquote bike ride across the country was, coming out to Colorado and climbing all the 14ers and living in the back of my pickup truck.
Oh hell yeah!
And I did that when
Nice.
I was living in Wisconsin. And so I came out here and I did it in about 2 months. And actually I didn't quite climb them all. I was shy of like 6 peaks at the time. And then like winter was moving in and I was running out of money and I had to go back home and get a job. And same thing, man, I'm just out there in the mountains every single day, just gosh, living the good life. And I'm thinking, man, I got to go back and get a job. Like, this is going to really suck. And same thing, man. I went back to Wisconsin and I'm like, well, there's no mountains here. Like, what can I do, man? And that's when I started running. That's just literally how it all started. So I can relate to so much of your story. But,
I mean, that's so incredible. I think what's interesting is when you make that sort of like maybe impulsive or arbitrary decision to push yourself really, really far, like riding a bike cross country or going after all the 14ers, like all of a sudden you realize that like pretty much anything is possible.
yeah.
As long as you're within the realm of physics, right? Like, you can go really, really far, far in quotes, far either distance or altitude or, to, whatever like destination you kind of set. And, just because it hasn't been done before, because no one's linked a unique set of feats together, doesn't mean it can't be done. And so like, it's super empowering. And just having those moments those sort of pivot points, I think it changes everything. And sometimes I think it's like, it's a weight to bear, right? Because now you know anything's possible, right? It's like now you recognize, like, there's a whole world of possibility out there,
Yeah,
and you just have to decide to go after it. Um,
totally.
yeah, so
100%.
glad to hear that.
No, I agree with you, man. And I try and get people fired up. Like after I finished my first 100 miler, my immediate first thought was, okay, yeah, I did this thing, but I'm definitely not special because I'm not a gifted athlete. Like this is something that everyone has if they want to do it, you know? Like I was far from a gifted athlete, like high school, out of high school, and I managed to do this thing. And I just realized like anybody can do this. And if I can do this, like what else can I do? Write a book, start a business, like sky's the limit. I just did the hardest thing I've ever done. So, it's just uphill from here. So yeah, man.
I mean, yeah, it's super, super empowering. I almost, I wish I had that experience maybe a little bit earlier in life. I mean, I did the bike ride when I was 26, 27. I think also having the experience of being a caregiver early on in my life, like as shitty as it was and as hard as it was,
Mhm.
it also set me up to be super grateful for so many other things in my life. It taught me so many humbling lessons early on in life. And I was able to sort of replace bitterness with a whole bunch of other more productive emotions, and look for a whole lot more good in my life, and be grateful for it. So yeah, I think now it's just a matter of like, how do I optimize in a way that allows me to get more of those experiences, to go after it in a more meaningful way, to set really cool goals. Like, rim to rim to rim was always on my list, right? And one day, like after my dad passed, I was just like, you know what, time to stop putting it off. Like,
Mhm.
let's organize, let's remove the barriers and obstacles to completing this mission, and let's do it. And then after that, I was like, I like, what else am I going after? Like, I go up to New Hampshire. My mother and father-in-law have a place up there in southern New Hampshire, and I'd heard about this thing called the Presidential Traverse, and I was
Mhm.
like, it was 2 hours north, and then 2 hours back, but it was worth the drive. So like, let's do it. So spend a day and went up there and did it, and like had a great experience going after an amazing run, right? So like how do we identify more of those adventures and just set yourself up to get those experiences and knock them out one by one,
Yeah,
as life and you know commitments permit. So
totally. Totally. And you said you might not do another 100 miler, but it looks like you've done quite a few races, like, the quote unquote shorter distances. Like you've done everything from 5K up to 50 miles, and you've done quite a few races in there. Do you consider yourself like short and fast type of guy rather than long and slow? And by the way, you set an FKT this year. I watched your video on the rim to rim to rim, and you finished in the daylight. So you must have had a pretty good time there too.
dude, thank you. That is super kind of you, super super gracious. You know, I'm all over the place in race distance. I think the race distance ends up being kind of a function of what I'm able to train for. As I think most people are kind of in a similar bucket, or what's available to you. I mean, so we've got a really great race company in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area called EX2 Adventures, and they host probably 2 or 3 races a month, and races, either cycling or trail running, and they do some like duathlon, triathlon stuff too. So I ended up doing like pretty much all of all of the ones they offer
Nice.
during the pandemic. It was kind of hard. They did a few, and did a great job socially distancing. Um, but yeah, I think when I can sign up for races around here, I love to not have to get on a plane or travel more than a couple hours. So there's been some good 50Ks and 50 milers in this area, which have been great to go after. But I'm up for any of it, and I think that the shorter races, I love showing up for those after I've done like long training and I'm feeling like really really strong, and then it's fun. Like I think right after I did the FKT on the Rock Creek Trail, this fall, I showed up at a 5-miler. And just, it's like the question is like, how fast can you blaze through that 5-miler on the trail? And it's just a great feeling because you're changing it up, because the FKT is 31, 32 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you gotta pace it out a little bit, for sure. And by the way, please do not think of me as like some kind of elite or really fast runner. The FKT was an FKT because I showed up before the fast guys got there. I think at this point the FKT has been lowered by like an hour. So put the asterisk on it for sure. But I love, anytime I can show up and feel like I'm putting in a good effort. That's a huge win for me. And sometimes, look, the fast guys don't show up, and I'll get on the podium, which is kind of fun. But most of the time, I'm an age grouper, and that's my lot, and I'm good with it. I'm excited.
You and me both, man.
You're right.
Yeah. No, I feel like you've got a couple more 100-milers in you.
I might. Yeah. I gotta be more disciplined though. I think the 100-miler that I trained for, I peaked in my training at 55 miles a week.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm a super low mileage trainer. I kind of just, I try to show up and make sure I'm getting calories in me at the race, and hydrating and taking care of myself, and not overdoing it. I think if I did another 100-miler, I would probably try to train like in a more disciplined way, so that I could do a max output at the 100-mile distance. Because I think with Rocky, I was like, I wanted to my A goal was finish. B goal was like under 24 hours.
Sure.
I ended up running in 22:34.
Perfect.
And I ran a negative split, which is kind of fun, which also indicates maybe I could have pushed a little bit, but I'm so happy with that. But I think you're right. I think there's maybe one or two more, but I gotta get myself psyched up. So
for sure. Yeah.
Send me more books to read. Send me more YouTube videos to watch.
So this is quite a journey you've been on. Like if I had gone through this journey, I don't know. I feel like maybe I would be looking at the world through like humble eyes. I'm not really sure. Like, where is your head at now? Where's your mental space at now? Just kind of in general, just like with your life philosophies, day-to-day living.
Yeah. During the writing of the book, I had the chance to have a conversation with Dominic Grossman. I don't know if you follow Dominic at all, but he's an athlete I've looked up to for a long time, and I in this sort of like scouring of YouTube and corners of the internet for content to consume on ultra running, I found a couple of videos where he talks about his dad who had Parkinson's disease. And there's a video where I think they're sort of documenting one of his wins at the AC 100. And there's a lot about his dad passing away a few weeks or a few months after a race.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah. And so I've been able to connect with Dominic, and super, super grateful for that. But the conversation that we had kind of as I was writing the book, we spent a lot of time talking about gratitude and the transformational power that gratitude has to shape your worldview. And I think it's really, really easy to focus on everything you don't have. We live in a world where we're marketed to constantly and made to feel inferior and made to feel incomplete. And like we need more stuff and more money and more Instagrammable moments. But the reality is that is a deficit mindset, right? I mean, that is just reinforcing this idea that we're not yet the version of the person that we want to be. And so, and we don't have the things that are going to make us happy, but you sort of have to flip that around. And this sort of notion of practicing gratitude very intentionally is important. And, you might not have the perfect run every time. You might not go out and set the FKT. You might not, set a PR or a CR on Strava every time you go out for the run, right? But at least you got your shoes on. At least you got out the door. spending so much time with my dad, watching my father die slowly, to put it bluntly, reminded me how important it is to be grateful for what I have. Um, the ability to get out of bed on my own, the ability to go for that run, the ability to show up at work, you know, and help clients, and you know, lead my teammates, my colleagues. The joy of you know, being locked down with my best friend and my life partner, with my wife, you know, every day, and our two cats and our dog, like just having those moments where you take stock and you smile. Um, that's my life philosophy right now. And so like, you know, it's funny you mentioned like, are there more 100 milers out there? It's like, uh, yes, but right. I'm not, I'm not in a place of desperation to get back to that distance, right? It'll happen. Um, you know, and just like, you know, there are many more races to be run, in the future, I think, once we're sort of formally out of the haze of the pandemic. But for now, you know, sort of being in that space where I'm happy with what I have. And I think a lot of people are realizing how important that is right now. Because there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of suffering, a lot of loss in the world. But if you can be grateful, man, you're doing yourself a huge favor. So
That's 80% of it right there, is just being grateful. You know,
yeah,
we got a roof over our head, you know, loving relationships in our lives, our health, you know, just the fact that we can get out and go for a run or show up to the start of a race. I mean, that's so much. And recognizing that is a big part of it too. And yeah, just being thankful. I mean, yeah, you really said it, man. Um, have your coworkers read this book?
great question. I think in the process of doing the pre-sale and raising like crowdfunding for the, you know, the publishing process, I reached out to pretty much everybody I know. So, you know, friends, family, colleagues, for sure. Um, they've been really supportive at work. I work at a communications and marketing and you know, strategic planning firm,
Mhm.
and uh, you know, my boss is one of the big backers of the pre-sale.
Oh,
He's been super supportive, Michael
cool.
Aiken. Um, and, you know, I think a lot of my colleagues bought into the pre-sale, and many of them have read the book. And I think some of them know bits and pieces of the story, but now they know, you know, the whole story that I put to paper. And um, it's sort of interesting, it's a little tangential to that, but you know, I have family members who I write about in the book. They've been entirely supportive of me telling the story. They've gotten really excited about the book. I've even had family members who kind of thought they knew, and were surprised by what they read and realized how much I'd been through. And it just kind of goes to show that you might have people that you're close with, and you think you have an understanding of what they're going through, what they're experiencing, but sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
It's just a good reminder to reach out to people, because you never know what they're going through, what they're carrying. And I think you know, to sort of revisit an idea I just shared, just these days, I think a lot of people are going through it, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And the book's been a kind of interesting way for me to speak my piece, to claim my voice, tell my story, and invite people to share a little bit more about their experiences.
Mhm.
It's been a really, really kind of fulfilling element of the book that I did not expect at all.
Mhm.
But you know, it's funny, like you're telling me that you relate to the book in a lot of ways. I'm sure that we could have a lot of conversations about things that you've been through personally, you know, and that you carry, and that just resonated with you in a unique, and really special way. And I've had those kinds of conversations with people, and like that's just been so fulfilling, and really surprising. But perhaps one of the most important things I got out of writing the book. So I'm really grateful for people coming forward and just saying thank you, and I want to share with you kind of what I'm working through right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, totally. Did you feel like a sense of almost nakedness when you knew people were reading it, family members and coworkers, and like you're going to work in the morning and just got to be your normal self, and half a dozen people now, they know your story. Like, how did that feel?
Yeah, and it sounds like you might be there too. So like,
Oh
I'm
God, it was
curious.
so
Yeah,
hard. It was so
yeah,
hard.
yeah. It's you bare your soul a little bit, right? When you write about personal stories, and what what's interesting is like for a long time I didn't have the energy or the courage or the bravery to actually tell this story, like, with people. I might allude to it, but I think going back to that notion of like not being able to connect with my friends when I was, starting out as a caregiver, 22, 23, 24, is hard for me to share that and get like a productive reaction from people that were like, uh, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. So like that kind of turned me off from sharing, and I never really got to a place where I felt like super empowered when I talked about, hey, I've got this father with a disability. He's in a wheelchair. I sometimes help feed him or clip his toenails or shave him. Like, what do you do in your free time? Like, it just, it was hard, and it wasn't until I got a little bit older, and I was like, you know what, like, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like my dad, was kind of a creepy old dude, and like he went to strip clubs to like sketch the ladies, like, and weaseled his way in so he wouldn't have to tip him or something. I don't even know really how it went down, but like, yeah, that's just the reality, and it's okay because nobody's perfect. And again, like, dad was a character, and like it doesn't make me any less or more by telling that story about him. But it's part of who I am. It's part of the experience. So I've learned to sort of like own it,
Yeah.
in a way that I think other people maybe are more equipped to do earlier on, or just naturally take to owning their story, or frankly sometimes are like forced into having to own their story. Like to be honest, and sort of reflect on a moment that we're in culturally. Like, I am a white dude, right? Like, I am not in a place where, I am in an oppressed class, but like there are a lot of people coming forth in a really, really creative way to like tell their story about systemic racism or about being othered. And like, they don't, it's not like a thing of convenience for them that like they have to do it. And so like, I'm privileged to be able to have the space that I got to like take my time and then tell my story, and like I think in that way writing in itself has become a gift for me, allowing me to claim my voice and try to inject a little bit more normalcy around aging and death and dying and being a caregiver and Parkinson's disease into a society that frankly doesn't want to talk about that shit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was one of the sort of like additional goals of the book, is like, how do we give people maybe a little bit more space and maybe some tools to be able to have these conversations in a way that we haven't yet been able to do.
Yeah. It's an important story. I'm glad you got it out, man. I think I think it's going to help people. I think that anybody that's going down the path of caregiving is going to be able to relate to it and find some sort of empowerment there, and they're going to be able to, the book's going to resonate. So I'm glad you got the story out. Like, just talking with you for the last hour and 15, like, I hope you have another book in you, and I hope you have another 100-miler in you. That's me being selfish and just like projecting myself on you, which is kind of rude to do, but just the little bit that I know you, like it just feels like this is a great start, and I hope it continues. So just keep doing what you're doing, man. Get the stories out, get the adventures out there, share the stories, be vulnerable. People need to hear this stuff, and people can relate to it. So yeah, I appreciate it, man.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for the encouragement. That means a ton. I'll take your selfishness as a compliment, that, I've done something right, for sure. But, more importantly, thank you for giving light to the story and giving a little bit air to the story. I appreciate it. And, look, I mean, I think that I consider it a huge privilege that you asked me to join you for the conversation. I mean, you interview some incredible human beings, and I can't relate to any of them. Like,
No, that's not
but
true.
you know,
They can't. They don't
but
write. They don't write
it's super
books.
humbling.
I mean,
That's
right?
true. I mean, it's super humbling though to be in that midst, to be in your midst. So
Oh,
I just want to
geez.
say thank you
Oh,
for creating
of
space. I
course. But
appreciate it.
listen, man, you are doing big things. I mean, writing a book, being vulnerable, getting your story out there for the public to read, you know, and doing these big adventures you're doing. You're doing big things by all means. So don't cut yourself short there. I mean, writing a book is nothing to sneeze at, especially when it's a really personal story to you, and it's a big chunk of your life. So I commend it. And yeah, man. One more thing, like I've noticed a lot of writers, like their first book is a memoir and then they start working towards like fiction. Do you have any interest whatsoever in maybe writing a fiction book someday? Are you there? Did I cut out? Oh, shoot. Maybe I lost you.
Oh yeah, sorry. This might be my internet. I've been having issues today. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Can you
That's
hear
okay.
me?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we're good. Did you catch that question or no? Oh, maybe I'm losing you again. You
Can you
there?
hear me now?
I can. Yeah.
All right. I don't know. Some got stuck in the tubes.
Sorry about that. I'm switching my internet right now in case it's on my end. At least I'm going to try to. Looks like you're frozen again.
Okay.
Okay, there we are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All
It
right.
might be on
Sorry.
my
I just
end.
don't.
Don't worry about it. It's all good.
I mean, I was having issues earlier today. So
It's all right.
anyway, I don't know where we were, but we might have to back up
Oh,
if
no.
there's a
I,
question there.
I was just curious, like a lot of writers, their first book is like a memoir and then they turn to fiction. Do you have any interest in maybe writing a fiction book down the road, or have you even thought about it?
Um, what's interesting is I just got into Dungeons and Dragons for the first time. I know that people usually have their experience with Dungeons and Dragons when they're like 12 or 13 years old. I literally just got invited to be part of a D&D group, and I got really excited about this like world building aspect
Oh,
and storytelling aspect of the gameplay. It relies on a ton of creativity and sort of like extemporaneous strategy, and scenario crafting, and I thought that was really cool. And also like there's it sort of reinforced the idea that I probably could come up with a work of fiction.
hmm.
But I will say that I think that life has enough vivid, wonderful, wild detail to capture and put into a work of nonfiction. So I think before I'd write a work of fiction, I think I'd probably attempt to capture a little bit more of my lived experience,
Hmm.
and do either another memoir or some creative nonfiction
Nice.
work.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Cool.
yeah. What have you written? I'm just curious, and I'm gonna have to check out your books now. By the way,
Oh, you're not going to be
you've
able to
left me
find them.
on the spot.
I mean, I wrote under a pseudonym. They're all pretty like dark. I mean, so I called them fiction books, but 80% of them are, my life experiences. And then I threw a lot of fiction in there to either spice the story up or tone it down here or whatever. But yeah, I wrote under a pseudonym and tried to kind of keep them all secret squirrel back in the day because they had sort of a dark element to it. And to be honest with you, I was a big fan of Dostoevsky, the Russian author, and his books are late 1800s. I like a lot of the old stuff, and I read one of his books called I'd been reading a ton. I had this second shift welding job when I was like in my 20s, and I was the only one there, and the day shift welders didn't want me to do any work because outworking them. They were like, you got to stop doing so much work. So I started reading on the clock, and I was working these long hours. And I just started reading and reading, and I was just pouring through all this old literature. And I came across Dostoevsky, and I read one of his books called Notes of the Underground. And the very first sentence of the book is, I am a sick man. I am an angry man. And as soon as I read that, I closed the book and put it down. And I was like, I'm going to write something. It was literally that sentence, the very first sentence of his book. And I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, I guess part of me could relate to that, but I was just like, if somebody in the 1800s can write something this dark and this just insane, and like what's going on in his head and all the darkness in there, and put it all on paper, like this is something I can do. So yeah, man. So that kind of spun me off in my journey. But
I love that.
After I climbed the 14ers, I did write a book about that. It was called Peak Bagger. And, you know, I'm somewhat proud of that book. When I go back and look at it now, this was years ago. When I look at it now, it's like, maybe I should have done this differently. I should have done this differently. But, you know, I dig that book. And, you know, I was never trying to write books that were like consumable by the normal public people, the normal people. Like I was always, I was always just like, trying to write something dark, like the stuff that I enjoyed reading, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, any marketing effort starts with knowing your audience, right? And, you know, if you're trying to ship something to everyone, you're kind of doomed to fail, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, if you can write to people with whom your stuff's going to resonate, just like Dostoevsky spoke to you, if you speak to people the same way, I mean, that's success. I mean, that's Seth Godin 101, how he talks about, you know, find your tribe, find your people.
Yeah.
I could not agree more. So it doesn't matter, frankly, if there are people that don't like it. If a few people like it and you wrote it for them, that's what counts, right?
For sure. Yeah, everyone read my stuff and was like really scared of what was going on in my head, but then they would pull me aside and go, "Man, that sounds like me." You know, so, you know, as dark as it was resonating. But yeah, enough about there's way better stuff to read than my stuff. So Josh, it's been so cool talking with you, man. I really appreciate this. Please stay in touch, man. We have a lot in common. I really enjoyed your book. I'm going to recommend it. You know, obviously we got you on the podcast, and I highly recommend it to people. This is no slight on you, but, you know, it's a simple read. It's, you know, not a super long book. It's, you know, a couple hundred pages. So, but I highly recommend it. And like I said, anybody that's in the caregiving role, you're going to be able to relate to this. And anybody that's in the ultra marathon world, you're going to be able to relate to it too. So check it out.
Adam, thank you so much. And I vow, next time in Colorado, my brother lives in Crested Butte. I envy him for that reason. But next time in Colorado and I can swing through Boulder, I will give you a high five or a handshake. Maybe we'll go for a run.
Oh, absolutely. I live right by the mountains, man. We got trails like a half a mile away. So please do, man. I got all kinds of cool trails we could run on. So yeah, definitely do that. You have a website too, right?
I do. Yeah. It's just my name, joshlasky.com, JOSHLASKY.com. From there, you can find out a little bit more about me. You can read a little bit more in the book, get a preview, and then get a link to order a copy if you're so inclined. But
cool.
Yeah,
what's the best?
I'll link to the podcast too. When it comes. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll link to the book and everything in your website. What's the best way for people to order this? Is there like a way that you make more money?
That is super kind of you to ask. To be honest, I mean, if I was writing the book to make money, I think I'm doing it wrong. But you know, honestly, the book should be available through any local bookstore that has the ability to order their books online. I've worked with a number of wholesalers and networks that, you know, wherever you are, you should be able to get it from your local bookstore. So if you want to support local and small, do that. If you want the fastest, you know, and you don't mind supporting the big guy, it's available on Amazon, and you can find it with a quick search online there.
But if people buy it from your website, you don't get an extra cut?
You can reach out to me directly if you want a signed copy.
Oh, there we go.
My email is on my website, and I will be happy to personally sign and make out a message to anyone who wants to order the book and get that signed copy, and I'll do it at cost plus shipping.
Cool.
That's really easy. So
Awesome.
yeah.
And you're online everywhere. People can find you, all the socials, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah. On Instagram as Josh Lasky, on Twitter as Josh Lasky, JoshLasky. Yeah, pretty open book, open door. So come say hi, come engage, and I'd love to hear from folks and share some stories, and at some point when we can go for a run, if
100%.
that makes sense.
Is there any thoughts on getting this out like an audio version?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I have a Kindle version and a paperback so far. In a few months, there will be a hardcover version coming out,
Oh, cool.
potentially with some additional content, which would be fun. So I might add like an epilogue to the hardcover version. And then a few months after that, probably in June or July, there will be an audiobook. So if you want to listen to this while you're training on the bike or out on the trail, that'll be available too.
Are you going to read it?
Yeah, it'll be read, read to you by the author.
Good.
Sure.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad. There's so many, because you know, I listen to a lot of audiobooks too, and there's just so many of them that have just been butchered by, you know, they hire like an actor to come in and read it, and they just don't do it justice. So
I mean, if Morgan Freeman shows up and wants to read it, we'll get the job. But
if James Earl Jones wants to do it, you know, he's
right.
For sure. That's a done deal. But
no, it's gonna be me, which will be fun.
Good.
So,
good.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and just keep doing you, man. I love it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Keep doing the podcast. Keep getting people to do big things. It's
cool.
It's fun to watch. So
thanks, brother. I appreciate you. All right, man. Talk soon.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
Goodbye.